Abby?
Yeah, sounds good.
Great.
I'm ready to go.
Okay. So again, just to make sure, if you are here with us, please, before you leave, sign in on the Google form. The link is in the chat, just so we know who's here. But I know I recognize a lot of you already, so hello to my students and hello to our visitors as well. So this is our fourth Writing Gab, sponsored by the Writing Lab. Hopefully you appreciate the cleverness of that. Today we're talking about abstracts. So yeah, just to let you know, Abby and I are the Maastricht University Writing Lab, and we're starting this program at Maastricht University. And basically, we're here to help you with all your writing needs at any point in the writing process. And we do these seminars occasionally. We do one-on-one consultations. So, that's our sort of mission, and that's our purpose in life. And today we're going to focus on abstracts because pretty much everybody, no matter where in the world you are studying these days, pretty much everybody has to write at least an abstract in English, even if you don't have to write much more than that in English. And of course, some people do write much more than that. But pretty much everybody has to write an abstract. And Abby and I have seen some wonderful abstracts, and we've seen some less than wonderful abstracts. So we are going to try to sort of break it down and show you what we've learned, basically, and summarize some tips and some strategies for writing your abstracts. So the first thing that I want to say about abstracts is, and most of you, I'm sure, already know this, that there are an infinite number of genres or styles or forms of abstracts, right? Every different purpose that you have, every different audience that you have requires maybe a slightly different version of an abstract. So it would be impossible for us to say, okay, here's exactly what you need to do in every case, in every abstract. That would be pointless, because then you would go out into your department, into your publishing world, and everything that we said, or many things that we said, would be totally irrelevant. So with that in mind, does this work? Okay, so with that in mind, I wanted to start with showing some sort of useful distinctions that we can make between different types of abstracts. And these are distinctions that hopefully you'll recognize as sort of real things in the real world. And then, well, yeah, so the first thing that might make a big difference is whether you are writing an abstract of a text or writing an abstract for a presentation or a seminar or an event, right? In that case, the sort of things that you're going to say, so the content and maybe the form in a little bit, are going to be slightly different. Another important distinction is whether you're writing an abstract of finished work or proposed work, right? A lot of abstracts are grant proposals, book proposals, chapter proposals, in which case you might not actually have done the research or written the text yet, and yet still you're expected to write an abstract of it. So that's a curious sort of case. On the other hand, if it's a finished work, probably in most cases you're expected to describe what you did. So basically, what you did or what you're going to do, right, might make a difference. And then you might have an abstract that's sort of divided into sections, visible sections. Or it might be a very short paragraph or relatively shorter paragraph. And it's all sort of built into one paragraph. So that will affect the look of the abstract. But really, probably, even though it's the simplest distinction, it's probably the most important because it determines how much detail and how much information you're going to be able to put in the abstract. And that is your word limit. Pretty much, I mean, on one hand, the nice thing about abstracts is that they usually the requirement to write an abstract usually comes with a word limit. So you know what kind of range you have to get this in. Doesn't make it any easier because you still have to fit the information in that word count. But this is going to determine the level, essentially the level of detail, right? So Abby and I spent a little while brainstorming and thinking about, what we have seen on the internet as far as advice and information about abstracts. And we found this a lot. We found this distinction between descriptive and informative, okay? But when we shared our experience, or I don't know, Abby, I forget exactly what you said, but for me, I've never seen, I've had to write probably several sort of official abstracts and many more than that sort of drafts of abstracts, but I've never seen anyone ask specifically for a descriptive or an informative abstract. We also thought that language could be confusing. Like when we thought about, well, what is the difference between description and information? Surely every abstract, no matter how short or how long it is, has some description and some, well, all of them have information, right? So it seems, on the other hand, sort of foolish to call one kind of abstract informative. Does that imply that other abstracts don't have information? So the more we thought about it, the more we talked about it, the more confused we got. So I just want to put that up there to show you, okay, you will see those terms out there, but it seems to us that in reality, it might end up making you more confused than it's worth. So really, so to sort of put it into other terms, really what we found is that a descriptive, a lot of advice that's out there basically says a descriptive abstract is a short abstract. So if you only have maybe two sentences to write, okay, that's something like a descriptive abstract. And if you are writing a longer one, it's going to tend to be more informative. So if that maybe clears up some confusion, then that's good. If it creates more confusion, oh well, we can talk about it later. So with those distinctions in mind, I'm going to try to leave you with just a sort of template or a sort of concept that hopefully will apply and will work for any abstract. And when you have to write a specific kind of abstract for a specific purpose, you're going to change maybe some of the things a little bit. But in my opinion, an abstract is always doing, I'm gonna show you 5 sort of steps, 5 moves that an abstract is always doing. But here's the concept in a nutshell. An abstract, in my opinion, is always doing 2 things at once. Yes, it's giving information, and it's giving information about what happened or what will happen, to put it into really simple terms. Or another phrase that I like to use is the research actions. Okay, and that word action is going to be sort of key for our talk, and Abby is going to, I think, elaborate on that idea of how to express the research as actions, right? So I think everybody agrees that an abstract is giving information, right? How could it not? It's giving information about your work. But the thing that I think many people don't realize or don't conceptualize as well is that it's also making an argument. and it's making an argument that the research has meaning and value. So if you think about, so actually I have a question for you guys. Where this comes from, and you see I've sort of chosen a slightly less abstract Picasso painting to emphasize this, because it's important to remember that an abstract is a text which will be read by people, right? And it's a communication between you, the researcher, or the presenter, and, well, that's my question to you. So who is the audience for a abstract, or who is potential audience for an abstract? Can you give me some ideas? Brainstorm a bit.
Well, in case of scientific papers, it's the reader that comes across the article on the Web of Science, for example.
Okay, and so yeah, I mean, and those readers might be many different kinds of people, but probably the first one we would think about are researchers, right? Other researchers, people who are trying to find out about your research. But besides researchers, who else is the audience for an abstract? Okay, Belinda wrote researchers into the same topic. Yep. Who else besides researchers?
Or when some of you have to write abstracts, surely you're doing it for a purpose, right? So perhaps you're doing it for a class in university. You're doing it because your professor told you to. If he told you it's an assignment that's been due, yeah. Or you're doing it because perhaps you want to submit a paper for consideration. You want to potentially go to a conference. Have any of you done that type of exercise yet? Tried to write an abstract for a conference, to present a paper or a research idea? Not quite? No? Future employment, says Belinda. Yeah, certainly. You can have to write an abstract for future employment. That's true.
Yeah, in an academic job, absolutely, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or if you don't, you know, the other thing to consider is you may not be submitting an abstract in your employment application, but your employers certainly will be looking at your published abstracts online, right? Yeah. Well, the point that I was leading to is that an abstract always has multiple audiences. Okay, not only researchers, but your publishers. But you know, the other thing that many people don't think about is it's also your colleagues, right? And I guess that's included in this idea of your potential employers, but also. Yeah, also your colleagues, and that's why, so these multiple audiences, that's why it's important to understand that you are, in a sense, making an argument, right? Not just giving information, but making an argument that your research is valuable, that it's interesting, that it's worth looking at. Now, don't be confused by this, because I'm not saying that the abstract, that you should directly make that argument in the words of the abstract. In other words, you shouldn't say, my research is really great. It's very valuable, and you should look at it, right? Of course, I think we all understand that that's not what should happen in an abstract. However, where you are making the argument is in the form of the abstract. The ordering of the information, connecting information, right? Putting things in the same sentence, for example, and in the word choice, the choice of words that you're using, right? So there's these sort of subtle, formal things that you're doing that are making an argument, right? And if you neglect that or forget that, then that's when the abstract can start to seem sometimes, you know, when you read an abstract and you're like, did a human even write this? Right? Because it's just sort of like a fact, a fact, a fact, a fact. There's no connection between these ideas and there's no argument being made. So I'm going to show you sort of 5 steps. Share my screen with you.
Maybe while you're sharing your screen, Joe,
Yep.
another one of the most important readers of abstracts are going to be all of you. Because indeed, I think as Joe's about to point out, for example, some of these steps, and perhaps we'll go through some models later, you have to also become the reader of abstracts if you want to look at certain models of how certain abstracts are written, so that you can try
Abby.
try to gain
So
some insight from those. But yeah, please take it, Joe. You've got your step-by-step guide.
Yeah, that's a brilliant insight, though, Abby. Thank you. And that's, you know, that's what we're doing at the Writing Lab, isn't it? We're sort of showing you you guys how to become readers of your own work and others' work. Writers as readers, learning to read as a writer. Okay. So somebody's. Oh, sure. Yeah, sure. Belinda will share the materials later. Abby has created a beautiful, much more beautiful than my sort of presentation. So we're going to share that later.
No, Joe, don't put yourself down.
Oh, I'm not putting myself down. I'm just being objective, Abby, objectively explaining the truth, as we should do in the abstract. So, okay, so the way I've designed the chart here is to show you that the things that you should be doing sort of at the same time, or that you can be doing. And on the left is probably these are the probably things that you know already that probably belong in an abstract. Although it is good to realize that they should come in this sort of logical order. But basically, step 1. Showing what has come before in the field of inquiry, what has led to the current study, describing previous research, recent events. This is where you're sort of setting the background of the scene. But at the same time, you're making an argument. You're making an argument that something is uncertain, something is unresolved, something is lacking. There's a need for your research, okay? Or the word that my students will be familiar with that I use in my class is there's an exigence. This is sort of a rhetorical phrase, which I like. Step 2, the main research question or goal, and summarize the research action. And I always recommend trying to do that in 1 sentence if you can. And this gets to what I'm talking about as far as when you connect 2 things into 1 sentence, you, in a sense, again, create this logical argument that they belong together. So for example, like, you know, sometimes the simplest is the best. Something like, in order to find out X, we did Y, right? And so with this, you're sort of showing that the research action follows directly from the question or goal, and that it offers a way forward. You'll notice that in my sort of argument boxes, every sort of step in the argument is trying to make a connection with previous steps, okay? And again, we're gonna maybe show some samples of how this can be done in the language, but the concept, hopefully, is important. Step 3, you give the details about what the researcher did to answer the research question. Another way of saying this is methods or methodology. That's the sort of academic term for this, but I like to put it in these terms. What did you do? And don't forget that you are a researcher who did something, okay? And the argument that you're making is that your actions were a valid way to answer the research question, okay? Step 4, results. The most important and interesting results of the research. And at the same time, the argument that you're giving is showing to what extent the results have answered that question in step 2 and resolved the lack or the need or the exigence in step 1. So here's where you might highlight your successes admit your failures. We found this to be true, but we're still not sure about this. And then step 5, which actually is probably the one that I find a lot of students and writers forget, and that is suggesting a next step, showing what the audience should take away from the research. And again, with your argument, on the level of argument, you're creating a sense of resolution, but temporary resolution, right? A small step in the great arc of human science and history has been completed, but there's still more to do, right? And in this way, you're pointing towards the next step in your research, or probably the next step in your readers' research, and giving them ideas of how this research can be used to further the field, essentially, or further the line of inquiry. So I think I need to turn it over to Abby and give her a moment to speak. But this is basically the concept that sort of that I'm going with. I guess I will just really briefly, just to show you visually how this works, because, you know, so these are 5 steps, but as I said before, you might have an abstract where these 5 steps are sort of divided into methodology, results, background. But it might be harder to see these 5 steps in a simple 1-paragraph essay. I really love, I'm just going to share a web page with you. I really love the University of North Carolina Writing Center web page. They have a brilliant page full of great advice. If I can share it with you. There we go. And it's nice to see that they basically agree with me about these 5 moves. I mean, I told Abby, if I'm being honest, I probably sort of subconsciously stole, you know, these ideas from other things that I've read, but I tried to put it into my words as well. But basically, essentially, their 5 moves correspond to mine, with, you know, slightly different wording. But I just wanted to show you this. It's a nice sort of visualization of what this can sort of look like in reality. And so we'll share the link with you, obviously, so you can read this for yourself. But you'll notice here that, like, yeah, so what's interesting, I guess, is that, you know, sometimes you have 2 steps in the same sentence, but essentially, other than that, it's basically 1 sentence each, accomplishing each of these steps. So that's your goal, is to sort of whittle down your argument and your information so that you're able to do both of these things in, let's say, 1 sentence each, or 2 sentences each, excuse me. So I'm going to turn it over to Abby, but any comments or any questions so far, or any things that are intriguing you or bewildering you about what I've mentioned?
I think while you're thinking about it, dear students and writers, I think also one of the things that I personally struggle with writing abstracts is how to whittle down all the content I have from my paper or my ideas into that rather neat looking color-coded paragraph where I'm doing each one of these 5 rhetorical steps. So if you have questions on that, we can definitely propose a couple of strategies towards the end if we have some time. If that's something you'd like to cover, although we didn't specifically plan for it today. But it's definitely something that can be, you know, a little bit difficult for people. How do I turn this really long essay or research paper into an abstract? And not only just an abstract, but an effective one that makes my reader interested in reading my much longer paper, or perhaps giving me that book deal, or perhaps hiring me as an academic. Okay. I think I'm going to share my screen now and take over if it's okay. If you do have questions, feel free to interrupt me or, you know, speak now. It doesn't really matter to me. Interrupt at any point in time. I think what I'm going to start with to pick up on this idea of when you're writing an abstract, you have to remember that it's not just about the research that you're talking about. It's about the research that you've done or your team has done, for example, if you're part of a research team. And you're trying to talk about it as if you have conducted the research. And I think that one of the things oftentimes that I see when I look through example abstracts, when I'm looking at models or when I see abstracts from students, is there's this increased need to try to be, as what students often say, as objective as possible, which can sometimes mean that they end up erasing their own voice or their own role from their actual research process. So as much as we already mentioned that you have to write as a reader and read as a writer, the same is also true when you are going to write an abstract. You have to make sure that you have a voice or a role to play in your particular research that you are describing in your abstract. So I've pulled out some quotes here. My slides are a bit more wordy than Joe's, unfortunately, but I think it's, to have the words after the fact make a bit of sense in context. So on one hand, when you want to have a voice or you want to put yourself or establish some self-awareness in your writing, especially within an abstract, which can be rather short, you want to make sure that you're being assertive and confident, which is easier said than done, but basically you have to tell your reader or readers, I'm here, I have something interesting to show you, and here's why you should read it. And you can accomplish that in several different ways, and it doesn't always mean trying to write your abstract in the most complicated way possible. But I'll cover that in just a moment. On the other hand, there's no shame as writers and as researchers in admitting what we don't know yet. And that's another key part of the abstract, usually the bit towards the end where we leave comments for the implications of our research. What does it mean that we've established these results? What does it mean that we've done this study? We have to know what we've accomplished, but also what we have not yet accomplished, what we already don't know. And that can also be quite insightful because it can leave perhaps the next research gap for further work to be done within the field or on the topic itself, yeah? So that being said, I'm going to cover something I've called voice and clarity, or essentially, I'm going to minimize the picture here so I can read, an author's role as an actor in their own writing, or how to do that, because it sounds rather complicated and abstract. So to unabstract it, essentially there are several tips you can try to use when you are doing this. Try to use, for example, when you're writing, the active voice when you can. And what this means is to try to put the main subject and the action near the front of the sentence, because in English, this is the most natural sounding bit of language. And essentially, when you want to try to communicate your ideas for your research, for your abstract, you want your reader to be able to understand you clearly and quickly, because you don't have a lot of space to try to explain everything you're going to cover in your bit of research. The second thing you can do is try to use active verbs for the main action or actions, and you can name the main subject, yeah? That's all still a little bit abstract advice, so I'll show you in just a moment with my third panel here. I have to go up and down because my text is quite large. The other question that comes up when we are trying to see how we can use our own voice, of course, being I, me, we. When can we use I, yeah? And I think that in abstracts, a lot of the times we do see I or we, but perhaps not often enough, or even not often enough in the research itself. So our general advice is to definitely use I or we, yeah, but don't overdo it. So essentially, the idea is when you try to avoid saying I, or you're so fearful of saying I, you can actually do something that we we have called denying your own human agency, or basically denying yourself a role in your own research. And it looks like this very abstract thing, this abstract bit of text that has been written, or a study that has been done by somebody, perhaps a robot we don't really even know, right? Because you've taken yourself completely out of the picture. So use I, but don't overdo it. Keep yourself in the picture of your own research experiment, yeah? A couple of example sentences I have here in the third panel of this that we, or Joe rather, has seen from some abstracts from students that he's had, is the text chooses the terminology of complex addition because, which is a really common sentence. You would, of course, encounter this type of concoction. But the problematic aspect here is that we've tried to be as objective as possible, seemingly, but we've actually created a confusion for our reader because we've removed ourselves. And we have instead said the text, in red here, is entirely responsible for my choice of the terminology of complex addition, which is not true. The text is not alive. We don't need to reanimate it as a zombie to try to make our choices for us. We can simply say, I chose the term complex addition because. But of course, sometimes it's not really possible to do that because we are told by our readers, our professors, or we are bound by some kind of constraints that we must try to remove I as much as possible, remove ourselves as much as possible. And while this is a disservice, essentially, to your abstract in terms of being comprehensible and clear and effective, it doesn't mean that this can't be accomplished in another way. And another way that you can do this is you can try to use the passive voice. So the very same sentence just below here in brown, in this text, the term complex addition is used for the following reasons. And here, we are not making text the performer of the action. It's no longer choosing for us, but we can clearly say that the text is using a term and it's implied that we have chosen the term for the text as the author of the text. So this is just one example. Another one here would be, this experiment tries to show that. And I think that you can get my general idea. The experiment does not try to show. You or your team of researchers have tried to show that the disease is spread by X, Y, or Z, right? So sometimes removing I can actually create very strange and confusing things for your reader, which does you a disservice for your abstract because it makes your reader quite confused. Yeah.
And I would go further. Maybe you're going to talk about this, Abby, but I would go further and get rid of probably even tries. I generally tell writers to avoid this language like I tried to, or I aimed to. Not in every case. Maybe when I look at this sentence, maybe it does sort of make sense to, if it's an experiment, you're trying something. But sometimes I see that language where it's not useful, right? Like, this text aims to describe the experiment, for example, and in that case, hopefully you can see that you have a sort of a pointless aim there. Like, either the text describes the experiment or it doesn't, and let's hope very much for your sake and for the reader's sake that it does. So in that case, I would eliminate the aims or the tries to sort of language. And I think that's often the case, especially in an abstract where you have to really cut down these unnecessary words.
Yeah, I mean, I would certainly agree with that. I think the very fine line oftentimes that we have to walk as writers, or let's say academic writers, if we can go that far, is that we are sometimes trying to hedge our writing or try to essentially show that our claim is not definite, not the only one that could potentially exist. But sometimes we end up over hedging, which can create this kind of timid, fearful approach to trying to show what your experiment actually does. So if your experiment actually shows that the disease is spread by something, as Joe said, you should definitely show that. There's no harm in claiming exactly what your experiment does. But to some extent, hedging can be helpful in some areas, which I don't think that we've covered hedging in writing quite yet. But it is just generally the concept that you want to leave room for others to have their own perspective on similar topics to yours, and that your your research or your claim, while valid, is perhaps not the only way of looking at one particular issue.
Abby, maybe we can skip to the sort of examples that we have just to show how this maybe works in a more.
Certainly, yeah.
And as we said, we'll share the presentation.
Certainly.
With you guys on the.
I can skip ahead then. The small bit of text I have here is trying to reiterate the fact that you do not only need to use what we call formal writing, or essentially what is incorrectly or sometimes unfortunately linked with the idea of very fancy, eloquent, high diction, fancy words. Sometimes informal writing can be quite effective, and we try to explain that a little bit. Go on, Joe?
Yeah, this is, well, I think like informal in the sense of stating things simply, using especially when we're talking about it in an abstract where you have to say things clearly. So we don't mean informal. This is a common confusion, right? We don't mean like informal as in, hey dude, here's some research that I did. You're not going to be using slang, but in the sense of, I did this to try, or well, to accomplish this, or
my experiment shows.
Yeah, exactly. So
yeah.
Things like this. You don't have to use the fanciest dictionary words, and in fact, sometimes it can be really.
Because in fact, maybe you've led me to the last point of this section as we skip quickly through it, that indeed we have to remember that one of the main important purposes of academic writing is to convey ideas, even complex ideas, as clearly, specifically, and accurately as possible. And if we sometimes use a language that is a little bit too eloquent, and it is not the best term, and we've simply chosen the word to try to make it sound more fancy, we can end up making our writing a little bit confusing for our reader. And then we haven't really done our job as well as possible when it comes to trying to make or write an abstract for any particular reader. So we wanted to show you some tips for 5-minute fixes in the interest of just trying to show you what it would look like to read through an abstract and try to improve it quickly, yeah? And I have a sample one here from the Communication Arts and Sciences. And the title in and of itself is quite a long-winded bit of text that I would sit down with this student and I would just say, what, right? So what I would actually do for this title is I would get them to explain to me, or essentially what they want to say in very basic terms, what the title of their paper is doing. And then we would work on some of the terminology that they've employed here. So the prevalence of theoretical behavior change components in the top breast cancer websites to encourage detection or prevention behaviors to solicit donations. Oof, that's a lot, yeah? I think that while it can be effective, it could be a little bit more concise and a little bit shorter and a little bit more clear as to try to inform your reader when you're picking a paper or when you're picking an abstract, to try to inform them a little bit better and more quickly what your paper is going to be about.
We should do a writing gab on, Abby, we should do a writing gab on titles, actually. That's a great idea.
Yes.
Because this is something that's almost never talked about. Like even in my writing classes, I have to admit, I don't often give time to talk about how to actually make an effective title. So that would be a good one. Which
is, I mean, that's a great point. That's why I didn't even attempt it for this read through, because it almost has to be considered a separate art. So I've highlighted here in this example abstract just 3 different colors to try to be as clear as possible in what I'm talking about. Blue would be general issues that I see in parts of the sentence that could be made more specific, parts of the sentence where we could eliminate some words that don't necessarily belong there. They're making it a little bit too wordy or too long, and they're obfuscating or making the meaning of the sentence unclear, or they're playing a very timid role, as Joe said, aims to, right? We can just say the experiment shows. And then I have highlighted in green here bits of this abstract that I, as an educated reader from more or less the same field, or even potentially a different field, I find these bits confusing myself, yeah? And then lastly, I've highlighted in red something that I would advise the student to change on a micro level, a smaller level, as they were kind of editing their essay, fine-tuning it, going through it. The blue and the green would be something on a macro level, looking at something of organization, of type of abstractive essay, of who my audience is, who my reader is, what they could want to see. And these micro issues are more like the editing bits that come after the fact. So that being said, as we start off, looking here, the internet has become a primary resource for the general public who seek health information about a variety of topics, including breast cancer. Yes, okay, we realize that people on the internet are often seeking information about a variety of topics. It's not necessary, however, for your paper, or this paper, because this paper is only focusing on those seeking health information about the topic of breast cancer. So we could almost eliminate a whole chunk of that sentence and literally skip to this end and say, the internet has become a primary resource specifically for those seeking health information about breast cancer, or just information about breast cancer. I would also perhaps advise, as I've read through the rest of this abstract, to include breast cancer prevention and detection, because this is one of the aims or one of the goals or the purposes of their entire paper. And in the topic sentence, I would make sure that I include kind of the scope of the research or the purpose of the writing in general. Next here, this particular research, this is a little bit redundant. We don't need to say this particular research, because when we say this research, we obviously mean this particular one. Or we could also just say, our research, my research, is a part of a larger study. And then here it becomes a little bit confusing, which evaluated the use of. So I would advise the student to perhaps rewrite this sentence to make it clear, is the larger study evaluating this use, or is their particular research component or part of the study evaluating the specific use? I'm not sure at this point. I think it could be the use of commas which are missing, or it could also just be that we could reword the sentence to be more clear as to what is doing what in the sentence, right? Here we've reached our bits of green language, basic design tenets. Okay, I know what a tenet is. It's a basic belief about something, sure, but a design tenet, to put these two together, I'm not really sure what this means within the scope or the aim of their project. So here, I think, Joe, you also mentioned, here would be one instance where they could consider inserting an example, a basic design tenet such as, or like, blank. Just an example of what that actually means, because it's very unclear to me.
If I can just jump in, because this is a big, I talk more about this with my classes, but this is a big, I think, misconception about an abstract or a summary, that it, and this is why we called actually the talk making abstracts less abstract, because I think people forget that there is an important place for a well-chosen example or a well-chosen detail in an abstract. I think sometimes people think, oh, it's an abstract, I have to say everything as general and abstract as possible. And I think the mistake there is that that ends up either creating a lot of confusion or simply creating boredom and inability to see the points or the interest or the excitement, honestly, of what you found or what you're looking for. So I agree with you, Abby, like that, like choosing, just throwing in one example there, just so even a reader, even if they're deep within the field, I think that's still useful, right? Even if they have a better idea than we do about what theoretical behavioral change components are, knowing what this writer and this researcher chose as their sort of key example is giving useful information for the
yeah, because essentially, as you put it, an abstract is not necessarily an extension of your paper. It's actually meant to stand alone and inform more or less of the basic ideas your paper is covering. And if we leave concepts like this in abstraction, or if we leave them a little bit confusing, then we haven't really informed in a self-contained way what our paper is trying to cover. even as I get through to the very end of this, I still have no idea what these tenets were on these websites that were very interesting to the student to try to evaluate. Yeah.
So, Abby, if I may, I don't think we need to go through the whole thing.
No.
But
I'm not going to. I'm going to skip ahead
okay.
here. Same thing for theoretical behavioral change components. This is a lot of words thrown together to try to explain something that remains abstract to me as the reader. I think that here, this would be a case where you could choose more specific language that is still clear to your audience. So I would then ask the student to explain what they mean by this. And then here, the top 157 breast cancer websites, we don't really know what those are. This could be another use for an example, yeah. Again, changing terminology, they've now reduced it to just theoretical components from this 4-word concoction up here. So it's even more confusing for me now as to what they mean. And we seem to have abandoned the idea of tenets. And they really focus on the 14. And throughout the entire piece, they switch, actually, I've highlighted it in red, they switch between using the word itself, the number itself spelled out, and the number itself written in these Arabic numerals. And just as a stylistic thing, generally, I think it's better to try to choose. And if you have high numbers, like 157 or 50%, I think it's perfectly acceptable to write with the Arabic numerals. I don't think you need to write out the word for, yeah? That being said, 2 more things I will cover, for example, is it will also discuss, which is a perfect instance here naturally occurring in the wild of us or the student here having created a zombie object, an academic zombie object. It is discussing. Not really, right? I mean, the paper is going to go through some bits, but it's not going to discuss. So I would almost ask the student to switch this verb and perhaps switch this anaphoric pronoun referring to the study itself. And then down here, it should first be noted that we can just eliminate this, start the sentence with overall. So we can cut out key words actually within this particular abstract. And that's going to be really helpful for students writing abstracts because of this word count you're typically confined to or chained to, right? Every single word is precious, so you should make every word count. And don't try to kill your word count with stuff like this, yeah? So maybe I don't need to go through the whole thing and I can stop sharing for a moment and just ask for some questions or general feedback. And if we have no questions.
Yeah, well, let's open it up to discussion because I always, the reason we invite you guys here is maybe to share your experience as well and your questions or your needs. And so, yeah, we'll open it up to you guys.
And if you're interested, as I was mentioning, I have a blank example abstract. I could give you all a moment to read it, and you could see if you could identify some of these areas where we could make it more concise or more clear as a group. Oh, maybe we're a bit shy. I don't know. I never like to be the first one to talk.
Well, yeah, so maybe a good first question would be, because you guys, I'm sure, already have experience writing abstracts in English. You know who doesn't? You know who doesn't have experience writing in English is this guy. Oh. He's just not very bright, actually. So he doesn't know how to write abstracts. But you guys do. So what has been your experience? What has worked for you? What hasn't worked for you? Or you know, because I guess another possible.
I think cats are shown to automatically boost the mood of every participant in one particular Zoom call. So I wouldn't even discourage Baby the cat from participating. I think that he has a role here. He has a role too.
Some of our readers are as perceptive as he is, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so anyway, I want to hear from you guys. What is your experience, or what are your needs? Why have you, what do you want to think about with abstracts?
Belinda says, quick question, tips you would give for having an awesome abstract as opposed to a good abstract. And Joe,
No,
you can take a stab at this in a moment. I think that it has to do with
but she's tricking you. She's tricking us, Abby.
A
We
lot of
asked
practice. A lot of practice. I would say that an awesome abstract is an abstract that's done its job. It doesn't necessarily need to have, you know, really elegant, flowery language or some awesome statistics. It essentially needs to communicate clearly and concisely the scope of your research. So I would say don't, you know, overwhelm yourself with trying to achieve the most awesome abstract. First, start with trying to achieve an effective abstract. So I would even move away from the term good, better, or awesome. I would say effective. It does its job, right? And with that, I would say it comes with a lot of practice, because when writing your abstract, while you should try to start off at least with explaining your ideas as clearly as possible, that doesn't mean that you can't edit it later, especially with the help of your lovely Writing Lab co-hosts, or perhaps your peers or some of your professors or advisors. You can ask them for some advice in editing your abstract to see where you can make some verbs more specific, or to see if you are perhaps being a little bit confusing in some areas, to see if you can make it a little bit more clear or improve it in some types of ways. Because it's very difficult for English language learners to try to hit this very awesome, if I can use your term, Belinda, awesome register where you've just done everything perfectly. It takes so much practice, and it's not something that comes from 1, 2, or 3 quick tips. It's more like labor over time. Anything to add, Joe, or what do you think?
Yeah, no, I mean, your answer was great, and I agree with it. But the question was to you guys. So nice trick, Belinda, but we want to hear what you think. What do you think is, what, in your experience, because I know you have plenty of experience with this. So in your experience, what makes an awesome abstract, or anyone else?
Or we could perhaps invite you to go one by one and ask you,
No,
you know,
well, I don't think we need to do that. But.
I mean, what's brought you today to discussion about abstracts? Surely there's something on your mind. How to improve them, how to write them in general. Why are they so irritating with their word counts? Why do we see this business?
May I say? Actually, because recently I mostly write the position paper, which is not so long, but I have a question when I'm writing abstract or introduction that I have almost the same length of each paragraph. If, for example, if I can only write 1,500 letters, and it's like I already occupy one of the abstract 400 letters, and for me it doesn't look proper that I have the same length of paragraph in the only abstract part. So I have some problem with that.
So you you have a problem with the fact that the abstract length of the paragraph looks the same as your introduction?
Yes, it will be the problem.
Mm-hmm. Then I would ask you, for example, this word limit or this character limit that you have for your introduction, does it come from your reader, from the professor who's assigned you this paper? Or is it something that you're implying upon yourself?
You mean that if it is necessary for my,
Yeah.
I think it's just what I think I should write in the beginning.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so for example, when you're writing something, you think I should make my introduction about 1,400 words.
Well, it's just the words limit that I can use to explain my work. What is the abstract of it? I think maybe my word is not as simplified as I wanted to.
Fair enough. I think that there's 2 different questions that I hear in there, at least. One of them is how to write an introduction, which we actually covered in a previous gab. I could definitely send you the link, for example, if you want to look at that. But the introduction is trying to accomplish a set of goals on its own that are unique, they're specific, they're not quite as similar to the abstract. The introduction is trying to really introduce the paper or the topic or the position that you're trying to take when you're writing. Whereas the goal or the purpose of an abstract is to introduce the entire bit of writing. So not just the idea itself, for example, or the argument, not only the idea and the argument always, but sometimes it includes some extra bits of information, like, you know, the results, or like the conclusion, what you found in the conclusion. But I think it really differs based on the type of abstract and position paper you're writing. So for example, I would want to see what is the topic you're covering, or for whom are you writing it? Who's going to read it, basically, something like that. And for the abstract, one of the ways that you can kind of effectively go about crafting one is to do a reverse outline of your paper, which is a very bizarre way of saying read through your paper and highlight with your pen, or, you know, in your computer, highlight the main idea of each paragraph, and then try to pull that out into a separate document and continue drafting or working on it to try to make it shorter or longer, and to see if it kind of covers every idea of the entire position paper. Whereas maybe the introduction is just setting the stage, or just introducing the position paper, or the bit of research you're covering, or saying why it's important. It's not trying to do the entire job of an abstract, which is a little bit more demanding. Yeah?
Yeah, thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, or other experience, other tips that have worked for you, or if you've tried to do something, that follow a piece of advice that you got and it didn't work, that would also be interesting.
For example, one of the bits of advice I think that doesn't work is what you pointed out in the beginning, Joe, this gap between when you read how to write an abstract on the internet, they'll tell you to write an informative one or a descriptive one. But when it comes time to actually submit that abstract to your professor, to the conference forum, to the seminar, to wherever you need to submit it, they don't ask you for an informative or a descriptive abstract. They ask you for simply an abstract. So there's a little bit of a gap.
A word count.
Yeah, a word count. There's a gap in terms of understanding what is it I'm supposed to write. Yeah.
I think that's the thing when you're looking for, I mean, the internet is full of such good advice, but a lot of, when we're talking about academic writing, a lot of it is like, you know, written with like university assignments in mind, or school assignments in mind, right? And sometimes those don't correspond to what you have to actually do in real life. So. But I generally just, you know, just as to know where to look, I do think not to be biased towards, not to be culturally biased, but I would say university writing centers in the UK or the US, because they have, you know, those teachers and those programs have now spent years, you know, collecting information about writing specifically. And so I think they really are good resources. Whereas, you know, and I'm sure there are good resources in Europe too, but I would say stay away from like company sites, right? Because there are a lot of like companies that want to sell you something and are giving you tips on writing. Sometimes they're good tips, but maybe they're not. Yeah, like if you Google how to write an abstract, there's so many websites that are like, basically how I see it is they say the information, here is the information you should include, but they don't talk about the argument side of it, the rhetorical side of it, how to connect this information, or what Abby talked about, how to reduce these unnecessary words, what to look for, which, you know, and they'll say, write in a formal academic way, as if that is much help, right? What does that mean? So.
Sometimes it's absolutely not helpful. Right? It's the opposite of helpful. Maybe what I could offer as some general tips, because we've covered what to do or what we could change for abstracts. And maybe going back to the concept that an abstract is supposed to stand alone, which essentially means it should cover the entire scope of the paper without necessarily needing to go in and read the entire paper to find out what it's about, trying to be clear within the abstract as to what it's about. Maybe what I would recommend would be try not to refer to a lot of other different research that's been done on the same topic within your abstract. Try to keep it to your main purpose, your main ideas, your main results, your method, and so on. Another thing that I would do is maybe don't add information that doesn't appear in your actual paper or in your actual presentation or in your book. Whatever you're writing the abstract for, don't add something else that's going to be new that won't appear there. Yeah. You can, of course, at the end suggest some implications. For example, my research project will benefit the field of literature, in my case, because it will add to the larger conversation about this theme, about this author. But I don't have to add, and by the way, this author could have been potentially you know, writing an absolutely different type of genre of writing that's not covered in my paper. That's maybe what I wouldn't do.
That reminds me, Abby, what you said. It reminds me of another quick tip, like Abby, in your 5-minute quick fixes. This is a good one. Look at your abstract and divide it between, like what Abby said, like talking about other research and talking about what you did in your study. And sometimes I do see that, like, it'll be like 90% sort of background information, and then like at the very last minute the researcher appears and says, oh, also I did this, right? And that's how it feels when you read an abstract like that. So mark the line, put a line, like print out your abstract or put it on the page in front of you and highlight or mark where that dividing line is. Really, like probably for most abstracts, the dividing line should be very close to the top, right? The first 1 or 2 sentences, maybe in a short paragraph abstract, giving background. And then, yeah, let's get into the good stuff. Let's get into what the present study or the present work is going to do.
Yeah, following those steps that you outlined. What is your problem? How are you going to solve that problem? Which is the methodology. And what did you achieve? What are your results? Other questions?
Yeah. Are you guys writing abstracts now? Is that
will you in the future?
Who's working on? Well, I'm sure you will in the future.
Near future. Thesis panic, I call it.
Just out for a leisurely Friday morning gab session then. Great. Well,
if we would be open to it, I have the one extra example without any color.
I would probably,
if you want to go through it or not, if it's interesting to anybody.
Extra, yeah, if anyone.
Well, then it says looking to write more papers and present more often. This would be a good segue into, if you want to write more papers and you want to write more often, I would say start with developing a writing habit. Not necessarily an addiction, but a habit. And one of the ways that I start a writing habit for myself and for some of my students is I ask them to keep journals of ideas, which do not have to take any kind of specific form or anything like that. It's mainly meant for you, and in the case of my students, me as an instructor, to kind of peer at what they're doing. But it's mainly meant for you to just try to get into the idea of writing every day, because so much of, in my opinion, what makes writing difficult, especially the large, looming, scary writing tasks like an abstract to submit to a conference or a seminar or a paper, or writing a paper, a research paper in general, is starting to write either of those types of things. This is where I find myself the most blocked. And by keeping a kind of journal where I nonsensically jot down my ideas, I can then either take some of those ideas and make them into something that looks like an abstract, or I kind of start by writing some nonsensical ideas about whatever I feel, and then I kind of bleed or lead into the idea of, yeah, I would be interested in writing maybe an abstract about this type of idea, or this type of thing I would be interested in developing a research project on. And I kind of keep a journal of very loose, very chaotic looking ideas that are meant for me and only me as the reader. And from there, it kind of builds this habit of writing a little bit every day. I find it to be kind of therapeutic, but also helpful for starting, getting over that block.
We're gonna, Abby and I will probably hang out a few more minutes, and we're happy to talk further. But for those of you who do want to go, I just wanted to say a couple things before we wrap up entirely. First is, well, three things actually. First is that, again, we are the Maastricht University Writing Lab, and we are at your service. Actually, I'm gonna send you a link to the Writing Lab page. Now we finally have a fancy new web page, and I'll pop that into the chat. So we are open for consultations if you want to, talk about any aspect of writing. Of course, I guess most of you here today are my students, so you will experience this anyway. But for those of you who are new to us, that's our website, and you can find us there and learn more about us. Then we're going to do another writing gab. Darn it, I forgot the date. Do you remember? It's in a couple of weeks.
I can have a quick look.
Yeah.
Maybe I can also further your idea that we are open to help with anything and everything that is trying to help you with writing, but not really playing this role of an editing service. And then aside from that, that we are available to do online consultations as well. If you're not really comfortable coming in to see us in person, or if we're in a current state of crisis like we are with this pandemic.
I was going to say, we don't even offer normal ones at the moment, but hopefully in the future.
Indeed. So I think, Joe, we had proposed either the 11th or the 18th of December.
I think we have a date. I don't. Well, anyway, this is a good opportunity to say follow us on Facebook, and then you'll know for sure when the next one is. We'll post it on there, but it's in a couple of weeks, and we're going to be talking about revising, I believe, right?
Revising and editing.
Editing and revising. So
your own work.
Yeah, sort of carrying on the conversation that we started this time with.
Yeah.
And what was the third thing? Oh my God.
Who knows?
Oh, yes, please, before you go, I think some people already escaped maybe, but please, I sent the link in the chat. We need everybody to sign in, please, at the Google Forms, just so we have a record of you, and we know where you learned about us. So we can get money from people who care about such things.
Money.
Want to know.
It's like to be able to keep track of who's interested in seeing us doing these kinds of online talks, and maybe who's interested in seeing us for consultations in the writing lab, so that we can try to validate our existence, maybe. Be useful for you, ultimately, and to see for how many of you we are actually useful.
So with that, I would say thanks. And if you want to stick around and ask questions, we'll be here a few more minutes. Otherwise, see you next time. Or for a few of you, see you.
Yep. Thanks, Katka. Thanks, Belinda. Can see your
Thank you very much.
Chat messages. Thanks, Archie.
Thank you.
Thanks, Cheng. Bye-bye.
Abigail and Joseph, can you hear me?
We
Yes.
can.
Hi, this is Peter. I've been kind of listening in and out to your workshop today. I really enjoyed it.
Thanks.
Unfortunately, my computer doesn't have a webcam, but perhaps in the future we could schedule a meeting. I'm based here in southern Hungary, and I got to know you all, or I got introduced, I guess, virtually to you all from Libor. Do you all work with Libor at the university?
Yes, we do.
Part of
He's our
Europe.
boss.
He's your boss. Okay, yeah. So he's part of the European Digital University program, and the university that I'm an ed tech consultant and advisor. It sounds like you all are. I'm assuming you're from the United States.
We are.
Yeah. Whereabouts?
The South, I think we could put ourselves regionally.
Okay.
I'm I'm from Atlanta, Georgia.
Okay, I'm from Washington, D.C. I've been living in Hungary for about 3 years, and I work as an ed tech consultant and copy editor proofreader here at the University of Pécs. And my wife is Hungarian. I have 4 bilingual kids who go to the school system here. But we're in partnership with your university, and I've been working closely with Libor to kind of talk about potential ways of collaborating in the future. And we have a lot of fun ideas. And exciting ideas, I think, and hopefully we'll be able to work together in the future to make them happen.
That would be cool. Share those ideas with us. I'm not sure what the best way is, but we could maybe set up a meeting to do that.
Yeah, definitely. I will contact Libor and my supervisors here at the university, and we can figure out a time. I'll find a computer that has my work computer here doesn't have a webcam. It just has I just have my microphone plugged in, but we can have a meeting at some point in the near future. I think we're meeting with Libor next week. I've gone to a number of the EDUC, the European Digital University meetings, but they have 15, 20, 30 people. And I've been tasked with the responsibility of trying to build some partnerships. So he invited me to come check out your presentation today, and it's incredibly important. For any of the students who are still in the room, I see there are several who are still here. I would really encourage you to take advantage of this incredible writing lab that you all have, because at the University of Pécs, we don't have this type of resource, unfortunately, and it's an incredible local opportunity to take advantage of. So make sure you utilize this. It sounds like it's free for the most part if you're a student at the university, and it's an incredible resource.
Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thanks very much. And is there a writing center of any kind or anything like that in Pécs?
In Southern Hungary, we have a foreign language center, but we don't really have a writing lab. So it's possible that I might even be able to direct some students to you all. I don't know how it all works out, but we have about 30,000 students at the university here. I don't know how that compares to yours. And quite a few are international students. But to be quite honest, a lot of professors who I work with on an individual basis, I have a background in writing as well. And I don't run a lab or anything like that. Like I haven't come up with any, and that's not in my future plans. But I work with a lot of professors who really struggle too in a foreign language, even if they're brilliant in German or Hungarian, they really struggle to put their ideas onto paper with translations. So I'm assuming you primarily work with students though, right?
For the time being, yeah. But we're open to working with faculty and staff members as well.
Yeah, I suppose right now we are limited to somehow the people do need to be like Maastricht University
exactly
affiliated, or else it's sort of we can't open it up to everybody in the world. On the other hand, I think with this EDUC program and maybe there's a way to make it work so that they can take advantage of that. But really what I'm interested in, because I'm just getting started with this project, and I think we, as you said, it's really needed in this area. So if we can network with other universities that even though obviously Hungary is a different country and a slightly different culture, but I think it shares the same sort of Central European structuring and attitude as far as when it comes to teaching writing and
There's very little of it. My kids go to a bilingual school here, and 2 of my kids are in full immersion Hungarian, and they get very little writing, and so I have to supplement that at home.
Yeah.
Just to make sure that they develop. And that's one of my greatest concerns. I mean, not to say that the US educational system is perfect and a utopia. There are plenty of problems over there as well, but there's very little hands-on writing and practice in the classroom. It's more, let's create lexical, walking encyclopedias with facts. And what do you do with those facts? How do you actually string them together into, cohesive thought? So I think it's something that a lot of high schools struggle and within this region. I've been to Czech Republic several times, and but I've never lived there for an extended period. But I'm assuming there are many shared in terms of the educational realm. There are shared issues,
yeah, I think so.
between the countries and the systems and the way they work. But excellent. Well, I hope we can. I see your email there. I'll post mine as well.
If you want to send us something in the meantime, you're certainly welcome to. You don't necessarily have to. I mean, of course, you're in contact with Libor, but you can reach us directly that way. So thank you for sharing your email.
Yeah, thanks very much. Glad you could join us.
Yeah, thanks for running this. I really enjoyed it. Well done. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we hope to see you perhaps in the future or to speak soon.
Yeah, I'll shoot you a follow-up email to both of you, and I've already let Libor know that I would be here today just to observe, and I'll let him know, that I was here, and we'll keep you posted about potential future partnerships. I think what you said, Joseph, about the EDUC framework, the European Digital University Framework. I think there are currently 8 universities involved, and I think there's a lot of room for flexibility in how students from these universities could interact with whatever programming we create and whatever you all create. As long as your writing lab is in that framework, there's quite a lot of room for creativity. Based on my understanding, I'm new to this program, so I just got tasked, with many of my other responsibilities here with helping to kind of generate some partnerships with other universities. So we'll see how it goes.
That's how I understand it. I think that the writing lab is definitely part of the framework, and that's why I think you were connected with us today. So,
right.
if your students can somehow take advantage of that, we'd be happy to have them and work with them. So please, please encourage.
Perhaps even joining
these or colleagues.
Yeah, perhaps even joining these online seminars as a first initiative would be one of those ways.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Out of curiosity, how long have you both lived in the Czech Republic?
I think it's going on 2 years now for me. Joe's a bit longer. He's almost a Brno native now, aren't you?
4 years this time and 7 years total, I believe now. In Brno.
Excellent. Okay. Well, I look forward to catching up or getting to know you all a little bit more in the future.
That's good. Thank you,
Yeah.
Peter.
Job well done. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
All right, thanks.
Miro, you've been super patient. Do you have any kind of question for us, or you want to chat?
Well, I kind of have a question, and I have an idea, and I basically have an idea how to write an effective abstract. So I want to check out with you guys. So let's say there is a problem, and it causes huge mayhem on human lives or livestock lives or whatever else. And the previous attempts to solve this problem have mixed results. But our team has found out a potentially successful solution, and we discovered X and Y. But to discover Z, we need to carry out more research. What do you think? Is that an effective?
That sounds like a very basic abstract template you've outlined. I think that if you endeavored to write what you've just explained to us, I think that you would have an excellent first draft. Just based on hearing that very short elevator pitch you've given about your research project, my initial advice would be focus on an initial killer topic sentence, because it seems to me what you have to add or offer is that you've discovered some kind of solution that others haven't. So I would say lead with that, because that's cool and interesting, and that's going to hook your reader to want to learn more. What do you think, Joe?
I mean, Miro, I think what you gave were essentially the 5 steps, right, that we talked about earlier. I mean, it sounded like that's the basic template that I would follow. So yeah, I think that's it. You've got the right idea.
So put it on paper, make a draft, and if you're interested, you can definitely set up a kind of consultation with us. You could look at it.
Well,
Yeah, well, he's going to have consultations with me anyway.
With you, perhaps, so enjoy. Okay.
bye.
So, bye-bye, guys. I think I'm going to leave. It was nice to talk to you,
Yep.
Miro.
Okay.
And to you, Joe.
Yep.
Bye-bye
Yep.
for now.
All right. So thanks. Ciao.
Ciao.
Yeah, goodbye.